Okay, so we are going to take a detour before the final part. Some people had questions, and I think it's best to address some of them before even settling into the next video. So let's deal with the real questions behind the theory. One person says, if the examiner asks, what is the ontological position and epistemological position of your study, and why those positions? I mean, this is a cool question. I don't know if they'll ask you though, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared. So this is one of the most common type of questions you might be asked. And the good news is that the answer is not as hard as it sounds. So the examiner is basically asking two things here. First, what do you believe reality is? That is ontology. And second, how do you believe knowledge about that reality is best gained? That is epistemology, right? So do not panic when you hear the words because you already know them. Again, let's break them apart. Ontology is about reality. Epistemology is about knowledge. So how do you answer this question? You can say something like, the ontological position of my study is that reality is best understood as objective, or maybe you can say subjective, because my research problem focuses on, then you state the research problem, maybe the issues with these people or that. And you can also again answer that my epistemological position is that knowledge is best gained through maybe participant experience, or you can say measurement, depending on what it is, or you can say combination of both, because that allows me to answer my research question in a way that is both suitable and meaningful. So you're just going to use this like a template or a starting point and personalize it based on what your research objective or questions are. And yeah, it is still simple, so don't complicate it. And let's say if your study is quantitative, suppose let's say your project is about the effect of social media use on academic performance. I like this topic a lot. You may say something like, my study takes a positivist or post-positivist ontological position because I assume that academic performance and social media use can be measured as real phenomena existing independently of my personal opinion. My epistemological position is that knowledge can be gained through objective measurement, numerical data, and statistical analysis. You see the answer here. And why did we give this answer? Because this kind of study is trying to measure patterns, relationships, or cause and effect. The topic is what? Effects of social media use on academic performance. And positivism is grounded in the belief that reality is singular, objective, and can be observed and quantified. While post-positivism accepts that reality exists, but our understanding is always imperfect and shaped by bias. And what if your study is qualitative? I think I should give all these random examples. So let's suppose your study is about students' experience of stress during exams. You may say something like, my study takes an interpretivist or constructivist ontological position because I believe that stress is experienced and understood differently by different students. My epistemological position is that knowledge is best gained by listening to students' own accounts through interviews or focus groups. And why is this the perfect answer? Because interpretivism and constructivism focus on subjective reality and the meanings people create from their experiences. That is it. And knowledge is not just measured here, it is understood from the inside. And what if your study is mixed methods? Yeah. So suppose your project uses both surveys and interviews. You might say something like, my study takes a pragmatic position because the research problem is my main concern. I believe both numerical evidence and personal experiences are useful. So I use both quantitative and qualitative data to answer the question as fully as possible. And that works because pragmatism is about what works best for the problem, not about staying loyal to only one kind of method. You get it? Then the other question is, why these positions? So here, the examiner does not just want you to name the position. They want you to justify it. You see that word, justify. So your why should sound something like, I chose this ontological and epistemological position because it aligns with the nature of my research question, the kind of knowledge I want to produce, and the methods needed to answer it well. That is straightforward. You are just saying this because it is coherent and not because it sounds impressive. And that is the truth. Then let's move to the next concern raised by someone. He said, how to link all these things, the ontology, epistemology, axiology, methodology, to your study or thesis. For the methodology, I'm not going to answer that because we all know where methodology is in our thesis. We know it is chapter 3, right? So let's look at the other ones boggling your minds. Think of these ideas as questions your thesis must answer. Again, ontology asks, what is reality here? Epistemology asks, how do I know about that reality? Then axiology asks, what values matter in this study? Methodology asks, how will I investigate it, right? So if you can answer those 4 questions clearly, then you're already building a strong philosophy section. How do you connect them in your thesis? So let's use one example all the way through. Again, let's say the influence of social media on students' academic habits. Now, let's link all those 4 concepts. Ontology is, ask yourself, what is the nature of this issue? Maybe you believe that academic habits are real patterns that can be measured, like study time, grades, and attention span. That would lean more toward a realist or positive view. Or maybe you believe students experience social media differently depending on their environment, self-control, school pressure, and personal habits. And that will lean more toward a subjective or interpretive view. So ontology shapes the kind of question you ask and the kind of reality you believe you are studying. So this actually covers your research questions. Then epistemology, how do we link it? Now we are going to ask the question, how will I know what is happening? Will you measure screen time and grades? Will you interview students about distraction and concentration? Or will you do both? So the source you use for knowledge depends on your epistemological stance. Some researchers rely on objective measurements, others rely on lived experience and meaning, and others use both. So if you're using something like just survey questionnaires and all that, that means you've chosen a different epistemological stance. Then axiology. This is where we ask the question, what values matter here? Are you concerned about student welfare? You know, we are talking about values. So are you concerned about student welfare? Do you care about fairness, ethics, mental health, or educational equity? Are you trying to avoid harm? So axiology is where your values enter the study. It reminds you that the research is not only about data, it is about responsibility, ethics, and the impact of what you do. And usually this comes under ethical considerations when you are writing it in your research methodology side, right? Then again, I don't want to talk about this, but I'm saying methodology, let's just do it. So methodology is where you ask, what is the best way to study it? So if you are looking to get only numbers, you may use questionnaires and statistics. If you want meaning, you may use interviews or focus groups. If you want both, you may use mixed methods. So you are just linking everything here. You are just stating it. You know, you don't have to come and go into details writing an essay in your thesis. The things that you select or choose reflect your stances. You get it? It reflects your position and what you choose. And sometimes you might state a line in maybe your methodology to say this is it, depending on your school's thesis guideline or how you are supposed to write it. So you can write something like maybe this study is guided by, let's say, a positivist or interpretivist or pragmatic paradigm. Then ontologically, it assumes that reality is objective or maybe reality is subjective, anything like that. Then you can say epistemologically, it assumes that knowledge is best gained through either measurement or interpretation or mixed methods. Then you can also say axiologically, the study acknowledges the role of researcher values and ethical responsibility. These assumptions shaped the choice of methodology and methods used in this study. So you could probably fix that in your methodological chapter. You can probably fix it under one of those sections. Or you can put it in the specific areas where they relate to. For example, ethical considerations, you can put all your concerns there, which shows your values, right? And again, it depends on the sample thesis that you've been given to follow, or it depends on the format and outline that your school has given. Other than that, but you should still keep it in your mind when anybody asks or confronts you, then you'll be able to explain properly. So that is a strong thesis style explanation. You don't have to go and sound vague or go into details writing complex stuff. It should just sound like you know what you are doing. Then I also want to cover something. This is like the types of studies and their philosophical orientations. You know, there are some type of studies that are more attuned to certain research paradigms. So someone might ask, what type of study fits which philosophy? And that is a very smart question because different study types usually fit different philosophical orientations. Not perfectly every time though, but there are strong patterns. So let's try something. Quantitative studies. So quantitative studies usually sit well with positivism or post-positivism. And I'm sure you know this already because they focus on measurements, numbers, relationships, and patterns. They often ask questions like, does X affect Y? How much? How often? Is there a relationship between these variables? So these kind of studies often use surveys, experiments, tests, structured observation, and statistical analysis, right? So an example could be a study on whether a new teaching method improves exam scores. That is usually positivist or post-positivist because you are testing results, comparing groups, and looking for measurable improvements. Then let's look at qualitative studies. They usually sit well with interpretivism or constructivism. Why? Because they focus on meaning, experience, and understanding in context. They often ask questions like, how do students experience this? What does this mean to them? How do people make sense of this situation? So here we realize that they often use interviews, focus groups, observation, and thematic analysis. That is it. Again, an example could be a study on how students feel about using AI in schoolwork. That is usually interpretivist or constructivist because the aim here is to understand experience and not just count responses. Then mixed methods, which is even more obvious. It often fits pragmatism. Why? Because pragmatism says the research problem should guide the choice of methods. If numbers help, use numbers. If stories help, use stories. If both help, use both. Okay, so let's say a study on a new school policy might use surveys to measure results and interviews to understand student and teacher experiences. Then we can also have stuff that are like exploratory studies. And exploratory studies are usually often qualitative, so they often lean toward interpretivism or constructivism. Because when you are exploring something new or not well understood, you usually want the depth first, right? You want to know what is happening, why it is happening, and how people are experiencing it. Then descriptive studies. And descriptive studies can either fit positivist or pragmatic approaches, depending on the goal. You see, so it's not a 100% fit, it's depending on the goal. If you are simply describing a measurable situation, such as the percentage of students using a particular app, that leans towards positivist. If you are describing a social experience in detail, it may lean to interpretivist, right? So they are not tied to only one paradigm here. Then we have explanatory studies, studies that seem or that seek to explain. So they often lean positivist or post-positivist because they try to explain relationships, causes, or patterns. Then case studies can fit several paradigms depending on how they are done. So a case study can be quantitative, qualitative, or mixed. But many case studies in especially social research lean towards interpretivist paradigms because they look closely at one case in details, in depth. An example could be a case study of one school's response to AI in learning. And this may focus on interviews, policy documents, and even classroom experience. So that will likely be interpretive. Then we have experimental studies, and this usually fits positivism or post-positivism because experiments are designed to test hypotheses and observe effects under control conditions. So that fits the idea of objective measurements and this cause and effect testing. So that is it. Then let's see, we can also have action-oriented or social change studies. And this often fits transformative or participatory paradigms. Why? Because the goal is not only to understand the world, but to improve it. So these studies often involve participants as partners, especially when the research is connected to inequality, marginalization, or social justice. So research here is not neutral in the cold sense. It is just purposeful and values driven. So that is it. And let's see, maybe what should you say in your viva when you are asked about philosophy? Viva voce in your defense. It's still the same thing we've talked about. My study is grounded in, let's say, a positivist, interpretivist, or pragmatic paradigm. I chose this because my research question is mainly concerned with maybe measurements, lived experience, or practical problem solving. Ontologically, I assume that reality is objective or maybe subjective. Epistemologically, I believe that knowledge is best gained through maybe objective measurements or something like that. Axiologically, I recognize that my values or ethical concerns play a role in the research process. These assumptions shaped my methodology, data collection, and analysis. You see how this answer is? It is very strong because it connects everything automatically. You are not just naming terms, you are showing logic. Yeah, these are some things to avoid saying. Don't say, my paradigm is positivism because I use a questionnaire. No, that is too shallow. A questionnaire does not automatically mean positivism. You need to explain the deeper reason. And do not say, I chose interpretivism because it sounds good. That is not a justification. And also don't say, I use mixed methods, so I'm automatically pragmatic. Well, not always. Mixed methods can be used in different ways, but pragmatism is often the strongest fit when your main focus is practical problem solving. So always link these explanations to your goal and your stance and beliefs. Okay. I think I've covered most of these questions. Let me know if there's anything else you need to know. So do not treat these concepts like unnecessary academic decorations. They are just logics behind your work. And when someone asks you about all this, they are not trying to confuse you. They are just checking whether your study makes sense from the inside out. And they want to see whether your ideas, your methods, and your findings all belong together. They flow well. And once you understand that, you stop memorizing random definitions and start thinking like a real researcher. I already believe you're a real researcher. So, and that is the goal, not to sound clever, but to sound clear. Clarity is important, and to sound consistent, to know exactly why your study is built the way it is. All the best. Bye.